Good evening and welcome to Northwood University. My name is Lauren Bess and I'm an admissions representative at the DeVos Graduate School of Management here at Northwood. We're so excited that you have joined us for our leadership series this evening. Tonight, we will be discussing a recession-proofing your leadership, learn, lead, and succeed in 2023 with Dr. Matt O'Connor. Dr. Matt O'Connor is an assistant professor and division chair at the DeVos Graduate School of Management here at Northwood. He is the lead faculty for organizational behavior, culture, and leadership, and serves a program quality leader for the MS in organizational leadership and Master of Science in Human Resources. Throughout his career, Matt has consulted for global corporations such as Nestle, Keurig, John Deere, and Dow Chemical on a variety of topics, including market research, competitive intelligence, leadership, culture, and execution. In 2020, Matt formed the Culture Performance Group to design and deliver organizational culture and leadership solutions for a wide variety of clients and partners. Matt has a PhD in ethical and creative leadership and an MBA in international business. He is based in Midland, Michigan. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Lauren. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So let me know if folks can't see my screen or anything that comes up. So I'm super excited. I see some familiar faces here, so that's wonderful. Lauren created this series, Recession-Proofing, and it's fascinating to me, and I'm really excited that we're doing it. So this is like my turn to talk about kind of recession-proofing from my perspective, and I think it's going to take a slightly different perspective than you might get from other people, but that's a good thing in my mind. But I need to set it up a little bit. I need to provide just a tad of context here before I jump into things. And so I'm not an economist. I'm not a finance person. So when it comes to the economy, I'm like a lot of people. I read what's happening. I talk to experts, my colleagues, things like that. And, recession was coming and recession was coming. But now when I Google, and you'll see in the top left corner here of the slides, and if anybody has questions or comments or wants to debate whether or not we're going into a recession, feel free to put that in the chat, because I'm not quite sure. And by that, I mean, when I Googled recession 2023, this was a couple days ago, I see this, are we in a recession or are we in a soft landing? Well, I don't even know what a soft landing means, okay? And to the right of that now, the folks, the economy's a little bit warmer than expected. Maybe we're still going to go into recession. The Conference Board expects one in 2023, okay? So I'm not entirely sure, and that's okay for me because I think the focus of our talk here is more about uncertainty, and that's kind of where we're at from a leadership perspective, because recessions are not the only external factor that can impact an organization and introduce uncertainty and or volatility into an organization. So from my perspective, I'm going to take a slightly different angle when we talk about recession proofing and kind of back it up a bit and think about it in terms of uncertainty proofing, or just even doing some sort of checkup on your leadership. And I'll explain a little bit about that here in a second. So beneath the headlines, there's a company here in Midland, Henderson Brothers Rust Proofing. This isn't a paid ad, but as I kept thinking to myself, what am I going to do for this talk? I kept thinking about recession proofing, and it reminded me of rust proofing, which is an automotive service that people have done to their cars out here. I'm not from Michigan, but when I first moved out here, my wife and her family had their vehicles rust proofed, and for me that was unusual. So I made note of it, and it kind of stuck in my head. So then I started thinking, okay, is there's some sort of like preventative maintenance aspect to this talk that I could do in some way, shape, or form. And so then I started thinking more in terms of automotive, and Northwood's got a really strong automotive position. And I thought, okay, if we're entering uncertainty and we're thinking about the automotive world in some way, for me, one of the things that I really enjoy, believe it or not, if anybody disagrees, feel free. But when I take my car in for service, I like getting this multi-point inspection. And what we have on the screen is one from a recent trip that we took one of our cars into Thailand out in Bay City, and you'll see, the basic things, the red, yellow, green type of assessment. So almost like a high level step back and kind of check out the major functions of a vehicle to see what is in relatively good shape, what might need some attention, and what is a major concern. Okay, and so using this inspection report that we get from vehicles and from service areas, I thought, how could we convert this in some way into a leadership style kind of multi-point inspection? So that's kind of what I came up here with here on the screen. And if anybody wants a PDF or Word document, I can send it to you, because this to me is designed to be customizable, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm calling this like the DeVos multi-point leadership inspection. Okay, this is kind of unique for me because I generally don't do things like this, but I wanted to think of kind of an engaging or unique way to present some of this. And the whole thought is that as uncertainty unfolds in our world, and it's most likely just going to continue, I think as leaders and as managers, we want to take a step back, okay, and do a quick checkup on the organization. And many places do this consistently and throughout the year. That's wonderful. But for me, I just started to think about it from a slightly different perspective. And so what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of these categories in some detail. I don't want to talk about everything, but I just want to kind of explain a little bit of the rationale as to what's behind it and the thinking, and then see if folks have questions or we can't, have a conversation in some way, shape, or form. So this is going to be the kind of focus of the next few minutes here, and I'm going to get into each of these sections in a little bit. So at the very top left, okay, there's a situational assessment, and I'm using this simultaneously to kind of set the stage, but to also get people thinking. And as I mentioned earlier, recessions are just one factor that can impact organizations, a big one for sure, but it could be something technological. Chat GPT is something that's on the minds of college professors now, and how will that impact it, and what types of uncertainty would that introduce into our world? But more importantly, I want to highlight that word situational, and I think that that's a key element from a leadership perspective. To me, I'm a firm believer in situational leadership. I believe having a portfolio of capabilities that can be used depending on the circumstance is always something for us to strive for as leaders. And there are models that talk about that, selling, directing, telling, that sort of thing. But for me, this is particularly salient for us when we think about, as leaders, seeing the whole perspective of the uncertainty. And at the top of the slide, there's this phrase from The Balcony in the Battlefield. If anybody recognizes that comes from Ron Heifetz, the gentleman who kind of created adaptive leadership, and how, as leaders, we need to see from multiple levels within an organization, 5 years out, 2 years out, 10 years out, 2 days out. And so getting a sense of the situation is super helpful in trying to understand what impact any type of uncertainty might have on you and on your organization. And I'm hoping that's going to become a little bit clearer as we talk, because this checkup is designed not just for you as leaders, but for you and your organization, because I think that falls under the same umbrella. And the assumption here, real quick, that I'm making with this particular type of assessment is during times of uncertainty, what I've seen as successful, the organizations that have persevered have maintained momentum, they have kept moving forward, they have not sort of become paralyzed by the uncertainty and then reactive. So from my perspective, an organization and a leader and a team of people that continue to move forward despite whatever uncertainty is in front of them is a sign to me that you are prepared and ready to make it through the other side if that other side ever comes. So my perspective is studying leadership uncertainty from the perspective of maintaining momentum, continuing to execute through people that work for you. And that's kind of how I structured this in a way. So I don't want to talk about all of this, but like on the left-hand side, I'm calling this like a leadership checkup. And so for me, leading through uncertainty, whether or not we are going into a recession, is primarily, from my perspective, about people. Okay, So the leadership skills and capabilities that I've put on here that we want to ask ourselves during this type of checkup, if we step back and spend 10 minutes thinking about this, that's helpful. And so I've highlighted kind of 4 elements that to me are particularly important when leading through uncertainty. And those are authenticity, clarity, accountability, and empathy. And so for each of those, we have a green box, a yellow triangle, and a red square. So are we good? Do we have some issues? Or do we really have some issues? And that's kind of where we're at. And the answer is probably we don't know. And if we don't know, that in and of itself is valuable for us. So a couple of things I want to highlight around authenticity first and foremost. That tends to be where I start. I feel I know that leaders who bring their authentic selves, and that's kind of a cliche, but it's true, flaws and all to the relationships. They generate stronger relationships with people, more engagement. So I ask folks, are you comfortable being yourself at work, flaws and all, okay? Or do you put up facades? Do you put up masks that tell people who you are as opposed to your real self? And there might be some argument we could have about that. I know we've had lots of those in class over the years about whether or not leaders need to project certain images, and I think they do. But underlying it all for me in times of uncertainty and ambiguity is authenticity, because leaders need to be trusted. And I think that that's something that folks want to ask themselves, if they're taking this inspection report, is do people really trust you in your organization? So do they come to you in confidence? Okay. Do they share with you who they are and what they're struggling with? Those are signs. Okay. So do an authenticity checkup. Do your personal values drive your leadership style? Okay. One of my takeaways, one of my philosophies is who you are is how you lead. If you're a kind, compassionate, generous human being, you'll probably be a kind, compassionate, and generous leader in some form. I'm not saying that's all you have to be, but it's an element of it, okay? So authenticity is huge. Clarity is also important, and I'm talking clarity from vision and clarity from communication. And so a couple things I wanted to highlight here. Talk about environmental factors that increase uncertainty, this idea of communication skills being current and sharp, all right? So a bit of a pet peeve. I still know some people who use fax machines, all right, we probably do out there. But the tools that we can use in organizations to communicate are so much greater than email and memo. I mean, we use Teams at Northwood. The chat function is fascinating. It's super effective. It speeds things up. So as leaders, are we skilled communicators? Are we up on the best and strongest technologies to communicate with our people? As we enter uncertainty, communicating with clarity is going to be huge for that. And so that's something that I like to think about. And how can we improve that communication using different technologies, different capabilities that might be developing or emerging. But the big thing for me is the why, right? And the vision. I know that setting expectations are important, but during times of uncertainty, we don't know what the outcome is always going to be. As people, as employees, we're sometimes confused. We are anxious, we are stressed, but we're also excited and motivated and eager for what's going to happen. And so the challenge that I think leaders have is to explain as best they can what is going to happen, right? So what is the vision for us as we come out of the uncertainty? That vision for the future has got to be crystal clear, because if it's not, people will be confused. And along with that vision, we need to be able to communicate why we're doing certain things. So if in your organization the vision isn't clear and you can't communicate the why, take a look at that, right? Mark that as yellow and spend a little bit of time thinking about those sorts of things. So authenticity and clarity kind of go hand in hand. Accountability is a little different. Accountability is something that I think kind of transcends all situations, so I put it in here. A couple of things, a couple of questions or elements around accountability that I tend to focus on is the very first question. So I like to step back and ask myself before I get into any type of situation, right? What did I do to create this? Or do I look inward first for accountability before I start to look elsewhere, for example, in processes or people? All right, so always starting with yourself first and foremost, to me, is something that is relevant in almost any situation. And so that's something to think about. And also being accountable for process and results. All right, so that's something that I think is not a controversial topic, but it's something that spurs debate in our leadership classes for sure at DeVos. Is as a leader, we are responsible and accountable for results. Sure, absolutely. But for me, especially in times of uncertainty, the process through which we achieve those results, that might actually be just as important. So how do you treat people? How do you collaborate? Okay. Are you keeping to your word? Are you following commitments? Are you resourcing what you need to? And if not, okay, what role do you play in that as a leader? Okay, so always starting to look inward first and then looking at the results in the process, to me, is super important as you enter uncertainty, because results are one thing, but there's that old cliche that how many dead bodies do you leave behind you as you move up the corporate ladder? I mean, that's really not what we're going for from my perspective. And so, in fact, it's more about how many people do you help become better on your way up the ladder is a more appropriate type of response to that. And it really comes down to what accountability is as a core value. Is it a buzzword in your organization, or is it something that actually matters? And now's a good time to think a little bit about that, okay? And the last one, inward for us as leaders: authenticity, clarity, accountability, empathy. Okay, empathy is incredibly important in that it's how we connect with people, but it's more than that. I think there are multiple kinds of empathy out there, and one of the ways that we think about it at DeVos is in terms of being able to recognize other people's emotions, okay, but can you do anything about it to support them? So those are a couple of different ways to think about it. It's one thing to understand and empathize with someone, but it's another to support that person and help them through whatever you need to help them with. And that's a leadership challenge to me, okay? And so just as a qualifier, yes, this document's riddled with like my own biases and things, but I think that's part of why folks can sort of customize it in some way. And I just want to emphasize real quick, frontline engagement during times of uncertainty is huge. So are you getting out there as a leader enough on the front lines, talking to the people who are to understand what their problems are, or are you relying on, the grapevine or other forms of methods? So, the more that leaders and managers can be out on the front lines and visible, the greater the engagement, the greater the connection that they have with their people. And that kind of leads us to the next section. Okay, so one of the sections of this is to step back and look inward at yourself, which is important, obviously. The next section I see is people, and I've titled this slide Preparing People or Prepared People. Okay, so do we need to do some work to get people ready, or are our people ready to go as is? And I think for me, there's a lot of things on here. So a lot of elements, engagement all the way down to being proactive. And sure, there's going to be some redundancy here, but I think this tells us a little bit about an organization. And so when I went through this and I was just highlighting ones that I found interesting, asking myself, are we engaged, right? So why is that important? Engaged, we're present, we're there, we're doing the work. All right, we're bought in. That's going to be helpful as we continue to execute and continue to move forward through uncertainty. Because if people are not engaged, right, they come in, they check, they clock in, they clock out, they do the bare minimum, those sorts of things. And during these sort of turbulent times, it's really about, I think, people elevating their performance, and being engaged is a fundamental, I think, prerequisite for that sort of thing. So that's a really important one to think about. I like decisive and disciplined, to think about those in tandem when it comes to whether or not people are both decisive and disciplined. And so why is that important during uncertainty? Well, for me anyway, it's because we want to continue to move forward, and moving forward requires people to make decisions, requires people to be proactive and empowered, which are a couple other words on this, but not careless and not risky and not foolish. And that's where kind of the disciplined angle comes in, especially during these times. We want people who make smart decisions, all right, in prudent risk taking, because there's so much uncertainty in the market. So if you're in a particular organization, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide, that has a culture that is very competitive and very achievement oriented, disciplined decision making might not be part of the repertoire there. So that could be something to pay attention to a little bit in maybe implementing some more controls if necessary as the uncertainty becomes clearer and we see more about what it would be. Some other elements I want to highlight here, being developed and supported. Okay, so that's common in every situation, but I think more so during these uncertainty times, especially in a recession, both within yourself as a leader, but then also your people. Skills, okay, are they up to speed on what they need? Supported, like that's something important in these times of uncertainty, that we need to understand people for who they are as human beings, okay, not just employees or employee ID numbers. If you think about what we went through with COVID, and I know people are tired of bringing that up, but it's a very relevant and recent example of massive uncertainty. And so how many of us in our jobs have had this conversation about being supported, being cared for, or supporting and caring for other people? Because that uncertainty causes anxiety. And so this is something that we can do to kind of mitigate or preempt some of those in some way, shape, or form. And then tactically, I have up here, you have the skills, you have the training. Are you fully staffed? Okay, do you have everybody you need in key positions? Because that's going to be essential when we continue to execute moving forward, okay? So bear with me, I've got a couple more here that I'll talk through. So as you think about culture, why do I include this on here? If you had me in class or you've talked to me, I'm a huge culture person. And culture, to me, culture is how work gets done. Okay, there's a lot of sort of debate around culture in climate. What is it? Culture is not necessarily how people are feeling, whether they're happy, sad, or engaged, or motivated. That's more climate. Culture is how do you get work done? Are you collaborative? Are you competitive? Do you cultivate skills? Okay, do you operate as a family? Do people share ideas openly? Okay, so the first step in this of continuing to execute through uncertainty is understanding the culture, okay, what it is at your organization. More importantly, though, what are the values and behaviors that it's built on? So behaviors form the foundation of culture, leader behaviors, employee behaviors that are tolerated and rewarded. And so we want to make sure as leaders, we are role modeling the right behavior for the type of culture we want. So if we want our people to be decisive but disciplined, we should act that way as well. And that's sort of something to think about as you move through uncertainty, is how your leadership combined with the employees in the team come together to form the culture, which is how you get stuff done. Because there are going to be different cultures in your organization. So it's important to have a sense of maybe how the salespeople work together versus the finance people or the marketers or the executive team. The executive team, the top management team, they have a culture all of their own. And so there's like macro cultures out there in organizations, and there are small sub ones. And those subcultures tend to be areas where there's tension between departments or tension on how to go about best doing something. And so if we can get ahead of that, that will help us continue to execute through that uncertainty, okay? And then for me, this is a bit of a pet peeve too around strategy and execution. So, good time to think about, is your culture aligned to your strategy? So are you externally focused? Are you exploratory in nature? So new markets, new customers, new products, and that requires a certain type of behavior. You need innovative behavior, you need creative behavior, collaborative behavior in certain spots? Or are you more about exploiting what you're currently doing, okay, in minimizing costs, in thinking more internally about operational performance? That's fine. That just requires different types of behaviors that we would want to reinforce as leaders. And so we want to think about that. Does our culture match our strategy, or do the subcultures affect that in some way? Because ultimately, if culture is how work gets done, execution is really getting work done. So culture and execution go hand in hand, which is why I put them on this sheet, because I think as leaders, we have a responsibility more than just to ourselves and our people, but the organization. And I think that that's something that sometimes gets missed when we talk about, the situational aspect of what we're doing. Seeing things from the balcony in the battlefield or at different layers helps us generate a stronger perspective of the uncertainty and how we can navigate through that, okay? So will the work continue to get done through the uncertainty, through the recession? All right, will you continue to perform? How do you know? How can you step back, okay, and check on that? Well, three areas: ability, activity, and agility. And let me talk a little bit about those. So when it comes to execution, questions to ask: do we know the key capabilities and skills that are necessary moving forward, and do we have them? Okay, so do we have the right people in the right spots, basically? Okay, and the same thing with activity. What are those core functions? Okay, so to move through a recession, right, does that change sort of where the strategic, I'll say, power or influence in an organization resides? If it tends to be in the R&D department or product development, does that change during a recession? Does it migrate more? So what are the most important things that we need to continue to get done, and do we have the skills to get those done moving forward through that recession? And the same thing with the activities. What are those activities? Okay, and do we have the skills for them? So what are the core jobs, tasks that are necessary? All right, so those are two kind of fundamental questions you can ask yourself around, like, if we're ready to execute in some way. And the last one is agility, and this is a little more complex, but is your organization proactive or reactive? That, to me, doesn't matter if it's a recession or not. That's something to be focused on regardless. But how do you know? And that's one of the key questions. And so what I would pose to people, if I'm talking to them in different situations, is: are you able to capitalize on opportunities quickly in the market, or are you too slow? Or do you get passed by? That's one way to think about if you're proactive or reactive. Is there an opportunity in the market and the organization just has some inertia that prevents them from moving forward? Like, you might have an execution problem there. Or you might have a culture problem. It's not quite sure, but it's worth getting into in some way. Okay, so the idea of sort of social skills from a leadership perspective, so the authenticity, the clarity, the accountability, the empathy, how that impacts people, and are people prepared for uncertainty in those key areas, because those two form the basis of the culture of the organization, which is going to play a huge role in your execution moving forward, so you can continue to perform and not become stagnant and not become reactive to the situation. Okay, and so at the very top left corner, there's an overall readiness assessment. Okay, so this is designed obviously to mimic the automotive inspection sheet. So the quantitative rigor behind this document isn't there, but it's enough to give you a barometer, right? And so check these off in some way. And so this is one that I have here that I put together. I just filled out at my desk as I was kind of maybe 10 minutes. I thought through that. And at a high level, I'm looking through this and I see, I'm doing pretty well on clarity. I could use some accountability help. What's interesting to me is, and these aren't accurate, right? I just checked boxes off to demonstrate what it might look like. But if I were to interpret this in some way, I see some concerns here around being trained, skilled, and staffed. Okay, we got 3 red boxes in a row. An area to focus on. And I like to say that, like, every area here should be focused on all the time, but this is more just a step back, a check up, and give you a sense of how are you performing, how are you feeling in those key areas that are going to be necessary given the situational uncertainty that a recession provides or comes with, or any other type of complexity out there in the environment, because ultimately a leader's job is to navigate that. All right, and we don't always know exactly where we're going or what the future is going to look like, but we have to put together enough of a picture so people can buy in, people stay engaged, and people keep productive and producing through that uncertainty, so the organization thrives. That's the ultimate goal there. And so maybe this document can help people step back and do a quick checkup on some key areas. And you can absolutely customize it in any way you want to any type of variables. For me, this is how, I guess, my interpretation or perspective of what I would consider to be most important in entering a recession or entering uncertainty. It might look different for other people, right? It might look different depending on your industry. Some of those leadership checkups, maybe it's more about your financial acumen and your strategic thinking than it is about your accountability and empathy. That's fine. But the point is that you actually step back, spend a little bit of time reflecting on yourself, on the organization, in a way that positions you for that uncertainty coming up. All right, so I'm going to stop there and see if there are, I can't see the chat or if there are any questions or anything, but I just wanted to say thank you to folks for joining in. Hope I didn't drone on too long there, and I'll see if there's anything. Lauren, anything to chime in on?
No, that was excellent, Matt, and I'm just looking at the chat right now, and I don't see any questions just yet.
Okay.
But overall, this was a fantastic presentation, and one I think that resonates with so many people as we kick off 2023 and developing ourselves as the future leaders. So thank you so much for touching base on this.
Oh, no, thank you for the opportunity. And, just to emphasize, I think that we don't do enough, we spend a lot of time in our organizations doing our, working in the business, like they say, and we don't always step back and work on ourselves or work on the organization. And that's something that we see a lot with entrepreneurs and small businesses. And so this might be a way for folks to step back and say, oh, okay, let's work on the business for a little bit.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. For everybody on the call, we do have our continued speaker series. The next one will be March 22nd with Dr. Peter Bush, and he'll be talking about investment tips for 2023. And in between that one and the April 12th one, we are having a graduate open house. If you do live in the Great Lakes Bay region on April 11th, we would love to have you join that as well. Until then, we'll see you April 12th, and then again on May 10th with Boost Your Career in the Workforce with Dr. Atama. I want to thank everybody so much for being on the call today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session. I hope everyone has a great night. Take care.
Thank you.